targeted act of terrorism in Washington, D.C. A young couple is dead. A man is under arrest. Has the pro-Palestinian protest movement made America unsafe for Jewish people? I'm Elizabeth Vargas, and America's News starts right now.
Tonight is nowhere safe for Jews. A young couple about to be engaged who worked together at the Israeli embassy are shot dead outside of Washington, D.C.'s Capital Jewish Museum.
Free Palestine!
The alleged killer says he did it for Gaza. How deep has anti-Semitism spread into America? I'll speak to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. Then the Maha movement is having its moment. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. releases his long-awaited Make America Healthy Again report. And it's focused on chronic illness in America's youngest generation. He says a fix is coming. What is it? And later, did our guest find Noah's Ark? He says yes. Researchers working at a site in Turkey uncover what they say is a tunnel located under a boat-shaped formation, and it matches the biblical description of Noah's Ark. Is the book of Genesis historically accurate?
But first tonight, Jewish people have been contending with anti-Semitism since Ramses II was pharaoh. But traditionally, America was one country where they could feel relatively safe. But that may no longer be the case, as anti-Semitism has taken hold in many of this country's institutions and sometimes erupting in violence. The latest shocking incident took place last night in the nation's capital, where a man from Illinois who said he wanted to free Palestine allegedly shot and killed two Israeli embassy staffers. It happened around 9 p.m. outside the Capital Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez is in custody tonight, facing federal murder and firearms charges. And Judge Jeanine Pirro, the interim U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., says hate crime charges could be coming.
Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated, especially in the nation's capital. Now, we're going to continue to investigate this as a hate crime and a crime of terrorism, and we will add additional charges as the evidence warrants.
Rodriguez is believed to have acted alone when police say he rolled up to that Jewish museum, approached four people outside who were all leaving an event there, and then shot and killed two of them with a handgun. Witnesses said he then went into the museum looking distressed, and some people inside, not knowing that he was the shooter, actually tried to help him until he told them to call police. He was arrested moments later.
Free Palestine! Come Hamas! Free Palestine! Come Hamas! Free Palestine!
The man and woman killed were a young couple who were about to be engaged. Yaron Lashinsky was born in Israel, and Sarah Milgram was born in Kansas. They met while working at the Israeli embassy and were attending an event for young diplomats last night, focused on getting humanitarian aid into Gaza. President Trump responded on Truth Social to the violence, saying killings based on anti-Semitism must end. And the White House vows this suspect will be brought to justice.
Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram were a beautiful young couple. In fact, we learned that Yaron was planning to propose to Sarah next week in Jerusalem. I spoke to the Attorney General this morning. The Department of Justice will be prosecuting the perpetrator responsible for this to the fullest extent of the law. Hatred has no place in the United States of America under President Donald Trump.
In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to the shooting, comparing the suspect to a Hamas terrorist whose sole purpose is to kill Jews.
The terrorist who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th. On that day, thousands of terrorists stormed into Israel from Gaza. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burned babies alive.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, says that in light of the horrific shooting, ongoing pro-Palestinian protests on all these Ivy League campuses, like the one just yesterday at Columbia University's graduation, he says they are an outrage. Earlier, I spoke to him about the shooting, campus protests, and other issues surrounding Israel and anti-Semitism here at home. Ambassador, great to have you on the show, not, of course, under these circumstances. I want to get your reaction to this awful news, but also what's happening there in Israel.
Well, I woke up to the news. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, called me early this morning, Israel time, to tell me what had happened. She was at the scene of the shooting at the time she called. It immediately began to reverberate throughout the nation of Israel as the morning started taking place and people woke up to the horrible news. Elizabeth, it's been a gut punch to the people of Israel, as if they didn't have enough to be concerned about. This was just a low blow because of the fact that you had two beautiful young people, both of whom have been activists for peace. We're actually at a meeting to try to bring Palestinians and Jewish people together to have conversation, and they're murdered in cold blood, even as they leave this event. Both employees of the Israeli embassy to the United States. It, of course, has caused people here to just really wonder what has happened to this world where anti-Semitism has turned from hideous and hateful violence, or rather rhetoric, into this level of violence that results in the death of two people.
Yeah, the protester yelled, "Free Palestine," and "I did it for Gaza." But as you point out, the cruel irony here is this couple was attending an event when they were trying to discuss ways to get more help into the people living in Gaza. Sarah Milgram, one of the victims, organized trips to Israel and volunteered at a group that promotes dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians.
That's what makes this so inexplainable. It just defies common sense that someone would murder these two particular young people. But then again, it's really hard to explain why you would murder anybody, especially because of their religion. Jewish people have to feel as if there's a level of blind, irrational hate. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to push back hard against this hideous anti-Semitism that has captured our college campuses, the streets of America, and quite frankly, around the world. There's really just no basis for it. And when these young people were planning to be in Israel next week to be engaged, they had already purchased the ring. He had purchased the ring. He's an Israeli citizen. I talked to his father this morning. It was heartbreaking to have that conversation. Turned out that he is employed by one of my closest friends here in Israel. I didn't know that at the time. It's a small country. People know each other. They care about each other. But an event like this just rocks them to their core.
Yeah, they were supposed to come to Israel next week. He was going to introduce Sarah, who's an American citizen, to his family there in Israel and then propose to her. You mentioned these demonstrations on college campuses. We're seeing a revival of some of those demonstrations despite all the government pushback on that. Just yesterday, pro-Palestinian protesters were burning the Israeli flag. They took over the library. They shut parts of the campus down. These protests, people get radicalized by watching these protests, according to law enforcement sources.
Well, and what's so ridiculous about it is they don't seem to have any level of education about the Middle East, Israel, or even the things they supposedly are protesting for. They essentially are protesting for Hamas. Now, Hamas has massacred and mutilated 1,200 Israeli innocent civilians. They ripped open the bodies of pregnant women in front of their children. They raped women in front of their families. They burned their bodies. They took 250 hostage. After 600 days, there's still 58 hostages in Gaza. This is something that I can't get my arms around, that anybody would go to the streets of America where we have freedom. We have freedom of speech. We can disagree with the government, scream at the government. But you can't scream things that are so untrue that it inflames people to end up committing acts of utter violence or to impede the rights of Jewish students simply to go to class and get the education. if I were the parent of one of these people on the campus, I'd say pack your stuff and come home. You're going to get a job. You're going to have to work hard with your hands because you obviously are not getting an education where you are, and I refuse to continue to pay for it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You bring up a good point, though. You can protest policy. You can say we don't want, let's try and find something else besides bombing Gaza, or let's not do this, or even criticize the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for his decisions. Many Israelis do just that. But to lionize, glamorize, and revere in many ways and salute a terrorist organization with the blood of so many on its hands, not just Israelis and now Americans, but Palestinians. Hamas is responsible for the deaths of Palestinians as well.
Tens of thousands of them. They put their own people in front of military targets intentionally because they don't really care about those human lives. And that's something that these college students, and some of them aren't even college students, they clearly don't understand. They're uneducated idiots who somehow think that they understand the world. But they ought to try free speech in Gaza. Doesn't work real well. The so-called Queers for Palestine ought to go and carry that banner into Gaza, or for that matter, a lot of the nations in the Middle East. You know where they are given the right to say those things? Israel.
Right.
Israel elects its government. They can choose to change it, and you have free speech here. You have freedom of movement, freedom of thought. And these are people who talk about stupid things that aren't true, like apartheid and racism. That's not what Israel is. And I think that's where it's really frustrating. If they had a grain of truth to their protest, it'd be a little easier to tolerate it. But this is supposed to be happening on an education platform. And instead, we have a lot of college administrators that don't have enough spine to stand up and say, if you want to say these hateful things, you're welcome to do it, but not on this campus. And you cannot keep people who are Jewish from going to class. You're not going to be able to do that anymore.
Ambassador Mike Huckabee joining us from Israel tonight. Thank you, sir, so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, I want to bring in our experts now. Bobby Chacon is a former FBI special agent, and David Bernstein is the founder and CEO of the North American Values Institute. He spent nearly 13 years in senior roles with the American Jewish Committee, the group that actually hosted that event last night in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of Woke Antisemitism, How Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. Great to have both of you here. Bobby, I want to just start with you and about this suspect in the police investigation. The suspect in this case was seen pacing outside the Jewish Museum before the victims emerged, and then he shot them. And then he went inside the museum. You don't see this very often. Criminals usually flee the scene. What was going on, do you think?
Well, first of all, my thoughts and prayers go out to the families and the people that are victims of this terrible tragedy. But, you say the word criminal, but I look at this guy as more of a terrorist. And so, a terrorist, almost like having a suicide bombing vest, he went in there to kill more people. He went in there, not caring whether or not he was shot by the police, and I think that he was hell-bent on more destruction and more deaths. I don't think he's very skilled at what he did. I think he, as the ambassador just said, I think he's probably very uneducated. I think he took out the wrong kafir. It wasn't even a Palestinian kafir that he pulled out. So I think that, this was a guy that was, radicalized, as you just said, with a lot of these protests. He's consuming this either personally in person or online or on the news, and he gets himself radicalized. He gets convinced that Israel is something that it is not. And he takes this action because he's so uneducated on what's happening, that he thinks there's this genocide, or he thinks that there's this regime that's killing people. And so he takes this action, when it's totally unjustified. He's a terrorist.
And David, I'll get to you in a second. But Bobby, Rodriguez is from Chicago. He bought the gun legally in Illinois. Did he drive all the way to Washington, D.C. just to commit these crimes?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think that, when you see radicalized people like this, they do things like this. They travel far distances. When they get, themselves in a mental state where they're going to commit an act like this, sure, they will drive or take a bus or so however they think they can get there under the radar, so to speak, and carry out this act.
David, you created the event this couple was attending. And last night, they were there to discuss ways to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. Sarah Milgram had devoted all her young career toward achieving peace.
Yeah, it was 20 years ago, and we tried to create an event. We created a beautiful event with young diplomats from around the world, with Israeli diplomats, with American Jewish young people who came together to discuss reconciliation and understanding. We thought it was a great event, and that's why it lasted 20 years consecutively. And here you have one that was even devoted to providing humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza, and they shot that up. So what was a beautiful event became a murder scene.
Why do you think this gunman allegedly picked, he didn't allegedly pick this. The gunman picked this event. And if we believe the police charges, he drove all the way from Chicago, Illinois to commit these crimes. Why would he pick this event?
It's hard to say. You know, I'm sure he made very few distinctions in his own mind between various kinds of events that Jews or pro-Israel Jews could be holding. But, you know, I think this is a very deep-seated ideology. We see this ideology on the far left. It's migrated from colleges to K through 12 education, where I think right now it's a big problem. And we're basically conditioning a generation of young people to see the world in a very stark way between oppressors and oppressed. And they tend to look at Jews or Israel as the oppressors, and they look at everybody else as the oppressed. And I think it was just a matter of time before this ideology gave rise to this kind of violence.
Bobby, today in New York City, police have posted heavy weapons teams outside synagogues, outside Jewish buildings. The New York City Police Commissioner said it was there as deterrence and reassurance to the Jewish community. We see the same thing happening in cities across the country. The commissioner said the threat level has been at a whole new level since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks and shows no signs of abating. And this kind of police presence, this is happening in cities across the country.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I mean, I take no pleasure in saying that I kind of predicted this would happen because of the permissive environment that we've allowed these protests to take place. And when I say protests, I mean, they have grown from regular protests where you're voicing an opinion or an opposing view to really radicalization rallies. These are radicalization rallies. And when you radicalize people and you get them whipped up like this and you allow it to keep happening, it's going to escalate. Yeah. This escalation was predictable, and it will happen again and again if we don't do something about it.
David, we've seen a 344% increase in anti-Semitic attacks over the last 5 years in this country. We only have about 10 seconds, but this is the highest number of attacks on record since the ADL started tracking these attacks in 1979.
Yeah, and I worry that if universities and K through 12 education systems don't start intervening more forcefully, we're going to just see more.
David Bernstein, Bobby Chacon, thank you both so much for joining us with both of your expertise on this very sad story tonight. Appreciate it. All right, coming up for us, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Maha report is finally out, and it tells the story of a whole generation of American kids sickened by toxins and ultra-processed food. So how do we fix this mess? Well, a friend of the show, the food babe, was at today's Maha event, and she joins us next. Plus, it was the ship commissioned by God to save all the animals of Earth from a biblical flood. I'm going to be joined by a researcher who says he's finally found Noah's Ark. So one of the more fascinating political novelties of the past year has been the merger between the traditionally left-leaning good food movement, spearheaded by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the right-leaning populist nationalism of Donald Trump. The slogan, "Make America Healthy Again," epitomizes that peculiar union, and many of the so-called Maha moms who are Kennedy's fans and foot soldiers have now defected from the Democratic Party and found a place and a voice inside the Republican Party's big tent. Now, with RFK Jr. running the Department of Health and Human Services, the Maha movement is about to do more than just advocate for things. These people now have real power, and they're wielding it to reshape government policy. We've already seen that with Secretary Kennedy's war on artificial dyes in our foods. And today he opened up a new front in the food fight. as the Make America Healthy Again Commission published a 68-page report outlining several factors it says are contributing to chronic illness in American kids. Those factors include things like a poor diet driven by ultra-processed chemical foods and chemical exposure, and a lack of physical activity and the overuse of medicine. Now, some arguments, like connecting fast food to childhood obesity, are not controversial. In fact, they're kind of obvious. Others, like casting doubt on the safety of childhood vaccines or medications like antidepressants and antibiotics, well, that continues to draw criticism that the movement embraces pseudoscience, which might actually put kids at risk. Regardless, the commission presented a united front at the unveiling ceremony this afternoon.
My uncle tried to do this, but he was killed and it never got done. And ever since then, we've been waiting for a president who would stand up and speak on behalf of the health of the American people and say, there is no difference between good economic policy, good environmental policy, and good public health policy, and good industrial policy. We can have all of them, but we need a united cabinet, and we need to go forward as a single people. I want to thank you for that, President Trump.
The commission now has until August to come up with a strategy to make America's children healthy again. My next guest has been a vocal supporter of the MAHA movement and was there for the unveiling today. Joining me now is Vani Hari. She is the MAHA social media activist known online as the Food Babe. Great to have you, Vani, on the show. So the New York Times calls you, they call you the Taylor Swift of MAHA moms. Trump supporter Laura Loomer called you an opportunistic liberal woman. And as I just said, millions of your followers know you as the Food Babe. How did you get involved in this whole campaign to clean up America's food?
You know, I've been working on this for over a decade. I was super sick as a child, and I hit rock bottom in my early 20s. I had endometriosis, I had an appendectomy, I had eczema, asthma, allergies, stomach issues, and it was the food I was eating. And I wish I had known what I know now about the food that I was eating, because as soon as I went from an ultra-processed food diet to a real food diet, everything changed. I went off every single prescription drug. I started to live a life that I never thought was possible. My brain was clear. I became athletic. I started to excel at my job and do these things that I never thought I'd be capable of doing when I was basically walking around like a zombie. And this is why I actually ended up quitting my job to become a food activist full time, because I thought this is so important for everyone to recognize the truth about what's happened to our food system. We've been mass poisoned as Americans. We are in a chemical soup right now, and there's an amazing chart actually on page 35 of the MAHA report that shows you all the chemical exposures that are happening to the human body and our small children today, and the reason why they are going to live a less life expectancy than us as of today if we don't change the trajectory of where health is heading in this country.
Yeah, you said that you grew up eating fast food and that quitting it and finding out you were so sick from the fast food gave it your, quote, Scarlett O'Hara moment when you knew you needed to change. It really is that story you just told is a testament to you are what you eat.
Yes, it is. And as soon as you learn the truth about what's been done to our food system, how there are toxic chemicals, I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary today to see President Trump and the highest levels of leadership coming out of the executive branch, this report that is detailing out the truth about the American food supply, calling out the chemicals that we're being exposed to, everything from artificial food dyes to titanium dioxide, that's a whitening agent that you'll find in Skittles, BHT, which is an endocrine disrupting chemical that you find in the lining of cereal bags and other products, and then pesticides. Pesticides was talked about 15 different times in this report, and pesticides are a real concern. We use 24% of the world's pesticides, but we're only 4% of the population. 87% of kids that they tested by the CDC had glyphosate in their urine. Glyphosate has been implicated to cause cancer in court cases across America, and we are using these chemicals in abundance. We need to start looking at how do we reduce the toxic load on our bodies and how we can regain health. The fact that childhood cancer has increased by 40% since 1975 is a travesty.
You know, you bring up glyphosate. I'm glad you brought that up because it's an ingredient used in a pesticide called Roundup. Many American farmers use this pesticide. Members of Congress, when RFK Jr. was testifying before Congress last week, warned him, don't try and touch glyphosate. This will hurt our farmers. And RFK Jr. responded, quote, don't worry, we are not going to do anything to jeopardize that business model. It sounds like he's not going to insist they stop using this.
Well, I think what this report lays out is that there's multi-factors of why we are so sick. We're being exposed to chemicals at every end, whether it's the food additives we eat or the farming chemicals that are on the food. And unfortunately, you can't go to the grocery store and look at the ingredient list and see glyphosate. It's internal to the fruit or vegetable.
Right.
It's sprayed right before harvest. Before they harvest wheat and oats and beans in this country, it's sprayed right before. And even though that only constitutes about 3% of the load of glyphosate that's used in this country, it affects the human exposure up to 90%. So it's a common sense thing that...
Don't we need to get them to stop using that?
Well, I think we need to look at ways that they can reduce their usage. And I think there's really amazing things that the Secretary of Agriculture could work with farmers and giving them other methods of regenerative farming and other things that are available to them and other tools and subsidies to allow them to start to convert their crops over so they don't have to use so much pesticides in their products.
You know, it's just another example.
In the production of their food.
It's another example, Vani, of how you think, well, let's just get that chemical out of our food supply, and yet then there's a lobbying group and a big economic interest. I mean, that is where the devil's going to be in the details as you and Secretary Kennedy go forward on this and start unveiling steps in August, because there's going to be a lobbying group for this company and a lobbying group for those farmers. You've already pointed out, you spent years pointing out that companies sell us foods with a bunch of junk in it, that they sell those same foods to other countries minus the junk. I mean, it's insane.
That's right. We are up against amazing special interests, and they're very organized and very sophisticated, and they hire front groups. They collude with farm bureaus. They are embedded in our government, and they're working every day and night to prevent the risks of their products from getting out to the public. But that stops today with this report, because finally we're getting the truth out to the American public that's largely been censored. You know, the International Agency for Research on Cancer labeled glyphosate a probable carcinogen 10 years ago. That has never been talked about until this day in this Maha report.
Okay, well, you keep getting the word out. Come on this show anytime. I am a huge... I think the word needs to get out to people that they know what they're eating. As a mom of 2 kids myself, I'm with you on that. Fellow mom here. Vani Hari, thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, coming up for us, a firebombing, a break-in, a mistreated pet, and even abused Christmas presents. Just another day of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Will the latest wild details sway the jurors, or are they getting numb to the avalanche of sensational allegations? All right, in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs today, testimony told the story of a jealous love triangle between Combs, his girlfriend Cassie Ventura, and Scott Mescudi, a rapper and actor who goes by the name Kid Cudi. Mescudi arrived for court today wearing jeans, a black leather jacket, and smoking a cigarette. He testified that he dated Ventura in 2011 when he thought she was no longer seeing Combs. But when Combs found out about the two dating, Mescudi testified this happened. These pictures were shown in court today of his Porsche 911 firebombed in his own driveway. Real gangster stuff. Mescudi testified his home was also broken into in a separate incident. His security cameras were removed, his dog was locked away in a room, and the Christmas presents he had bought for his family were all unwrapped by the intruder. He believed Combs was responsible for it all. Mescudi said he confronted Combs about it face to face, describing Combs as looking like a, quote, Marvel supervillain when he spoke to him. But Combs denied any involvement with the car fire. Mescudi said after that, his relationship with Ventura ended, the defense then asking, she played you, right? To which Mescudi answered, yes. The court is on break now for her holiday and will resume on Tuesday. But let's get the latest from our legal panel, NewsNation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host Jesse Ventura and trial attorney and former judge Mercedes Cohen.
You said Jesse Ventura again?
Did I do that
You did it again. You did it again. Third time's a charm. I had to call it out.
Oh, my God.
Isn't that like a famous...
Yes,
That's a famous...
I told the control room that they have to get a picture.
You are famous, but there's a famous wrestler, Jesse Ventura.
You're more famous.
Yes,
than
exactly.
Also a former governor. Jesse Weber.
Yes.
Jesse Weber. You said Kid Cudi made an entrance like none ever you've ever seen at a criminal trial today.
So we know this is a celebrity case. Everybody's talking about celebrities showing up. I mean, in the James Dean look, smoking a cigarette, comes in. It was reported that when he walked into that courtroom, everybody turned around. I mean, he's a massive star power there. And I think the jury was glued to every word he had to say. And I will tell you, such an important witness for the prosecution, if I can explain why.
Yes.
I think the prosecution has struggled in the past week and a half to articulate what racketeering is, this idea that Sean Combs is the head of a criminal enterprise. And in order to prove it, they have to prove two underlying crimes. So whether it's sex trafficking, bribery, obstruction, kidnapping, forced labor, testified to his car being blown up, that's arson. Testified about one of Sean Combs' employees being taken in a car against her will, brought to his house, that's kidnapping. That is exactly what the prosecution needs. And by the way, breaking into the home, that couples with what we heard this week about former assistants setting up the rooms, threats, blackmail, violence, guns, drugs.
You could bet it wasn't Sean Combs himself doing the firebombing and breaking in.
But that's what you need. You need the other people. It's a racketeering conspiracy. He didn't do it by himself. That's why I think it's important that he testified.
Do you agree this was a good week for the prosecution?
Definitely. And I think you're exactly right, Jesse, because racketeering is a difficult crime to prove. And it's right. It's this whole orbit of individuals that are involved
and
in
nobody
crimes.
else is indicted.
No one's
indicted.
No one else is indicted. One thing I will say, some of these allegations are so outrageous. It goes to what you said before we started the segment. These jurors are saying to themselves, can this really be real? Like, we're talking about Combs having either himself or his associates breaking into someone's home, unwrapping gifts, locking up the dog, and then having a Molotov cocktail put into someone's car. It starts to get more and more outrageous. And one of the things that the prosecution has to be careful of are some of these allegations so incredibly outrageous because, by the way, there's no proof that Combs was involved with the break-in. No proof, no DNA that's come in. There is no proof. I mean, he said, look, that law enforcement was called, but I never got the results from the DNA.
Can I counter that real quick?
Sure,
yeah,
of course.
Absolutely.
After they had the talk, there was no more break-ins, there was no more car bombings, and he allegedly said years after, Combs had said to him, I'm sorry about all that. Now, he wasn't specific about what he was sorry about, but
could have been the breakup. It could have been the breakup. But I mean, without the DNA and all that, that's what, if I were the defense is going to say in the closing arguments, hey, there's no proof of the thieves at all involved. Where's the DNA? There were fingerprints taken. None of it goes back to any associates of Combs. So they'll try to tie things in to try to really distance him. Because I do think, Jesse, he was a great witness from everybody that's been reporting.
Did the defense score any points on their cross-examination? What was it when they said, did she play you? What were they getting at?
So aside from saying, hey, this wasn't further investigated, the fire, putting that to the side, they're trying to really assassinate the character of Cassandra Ventura. They're saying, oh, she broke up with you out of nowhere. She played you. She played Sean Combs. This idea that she's manipulative. This idea that she's using burner phones. They're saying to the jury...
a bit of a stretch, though, given all the pictures we've seen and all the witnesses who've said they saw him beating her. The video...
the video's terrible.
Well, remember, she's not coming out and saying, I was beaten and the jury doesn't believe it. I think it's clear that happened. She's saying she was a victim of sex trafficking, and the defense has said, really? There are text messages where you encourage the freak-off, set them up. And that's why the prosecution had to call a key witness this week, a forensic psychologist who talked about why victims will not leave their abusers. Yeah. They needed to call her. So I think it goes to her credibility, the financial motive, filing a lawsuit, all that.
$20 million, $10 million from the hotel. So he does. That's why it's so important. We talked about earlier this week that Dr. Don Hughes testified, because everyone's going to wonder, why didn't you leave? This is outrageous what was happening to you.
It happens
You
a
needed
lot.
someone, exactly.
All right, Mercedes Cohen. Jesse Weber.
You got it. There we go.
I can't wait for this trial to be over, so I stop calling Jesse Weber Jesse Ventura. Thank you both so much.
You got it. Good seeing you.
All right,
Great
thank
to
you.
see
Coming up for us, 2 by 2, they went into the ark, male and female, as God had commanded. That is, of course, the story of Noah's Ark. And according to some, that story was more than a story, it was history. Noah's Ark may have just been found. And the person who says he found it joins me live next. One of the great endeavors of archaeology is figuring out which events described in the Bible actually happened. We know Jesus lived, had a lot of followers, and that he was crucified. That is all historical fact. It's what happened after he was crucified that depends on your faith. But with the emergence of modern astronomy and evolutionary biology, the book of Genesis hasn't held up as well. But hang on, because researchers in Turkey now claim they found indisputable evidence that the story of Noah's Ark was not a cautionary tale about the consequences of forsaking God, but a verifiable historical event. The team at Noah's Ark's Scans says this is the final resting place of Noah's Ark. Well, how do they know? Well, they started with the renderings of the ship based on the book of Genesis, in which God gave Noah detailed specifications on how to build the ark. The team claims those scans align almost identically with a rock formation in the Disruptor site of eastern Turkey. It's near Mount Ararat.
These are the timbers of the ship. That's what we're looking at.
It's amazing.
Joining us now is the lead archaeological researcher of Noah's Ark Scans, Andrew Joines, joining us live from Turkey. Andrew, great to have you on. First things first, how long have you and your group been looking for Noah's Ark?
Well, personally, I've been interested in the stories as a child. I first heard about it from Ron Wyatt, who came out to California when I was in middle school. I then came out to see this site that was discovered in 1959 by Captain Durupandar, and we started our research in 2019 on the site.
All right, what makes you think that what you have found is actually Noah's Ark and not some sort of, geological anomaly?
Well, first of all, it was noticed because of the ship's shape. And this is the only shape people saw out here in 1959 that got the world interested, because it's in the mountains of Ararat, just like Genesis 8:4 says in the Bible, where Noah's Ark landed. So we're in the right area. We have a shape of a ship. And then when you look at the size of it, it is exactly 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. That's what Moses wrote in the book of Genesis. And so, either that's a coincidence or we're looking at the right object. And then we started doing scans. And these are non-destructive geophysical scans that can peer below the soil, like radar and ERT. And they're showing a pattern of structure that you would not expect in nature. And then just last year, we did soil testing on the site, and we found out that it has almost 3 times as much organic matter inside the boat formation versus just right outside it.
Yeah, so you did the soil samples. You found potassium in the soil, which indicates that wood was there, right?
Yeah, that's the possibility. The biggest thing, though, is that because we have a higher organic matter, and if you look at the photos of the site, you will see that this is a ship shape sitting on a mountainside. And so if it's just part of the mountainside, you would expect to see the exact same chemical analysis from inside versus outside. But we're finding that inside is different.
How deep underground is this?
So some of the scans, for example, the radar, we're getting data down to about 30 feet. And it's showing subterranean structures and cavities. So there's a possibility that some of these rooms, or you can call it cages or whatever, they're not filled in yet with mud and material, but they're still open spaces.
If you haven't perused the book of Genesis lately, it's kind of shocking how many exact measurements and instructions the book of Genesis claims God gave Noah, 3 decks this big. I mean, is it really that specific? And does that match what you're finding?
Yeah, so, over time, you expect a wooden ship to decay, but we are noticing that there are layers of material just only inside the ship shape, and we're getting actually 3 big, thick layers, and then in between those layers, we're finding a central tunnel, it could be a central hallway, and then to the sides of those, we're finding these shapes, these right angles that suggest walls and rooms.
You're not the first person to claim to find Noah's Ark. Do you think you are the real one to find Noah's Ark?
Well, we hope so. And, until another site is found that matches, we're going to keep pursuing the research here.
All right. Andrew Joines, utterly fascinating. Noah's Ark, right where The Bible said it would be, just a little bit underground, and so far you say what you're finding matches up. I hope you find more evidence and we can absolutely confirm it. Come on back when you do.
Thank you for having me.
All right, coming up for us, the Trump administration is escalating its war against Harvard University by banning the school from having and admitting any students from other countries. Chris Cuomo joins me next to talk about that. All right, Chris Cuomo joins me now. Chris, you're going to dig deeper on the Trump administration's new edict today from the Department of Homeland Security to Harvard University, ruling it cannot have any foreign exchange students at the college campus, as well as this terrible shooting of this young couple out in D.C. outside the Jewish Museum.
I see them as connected, thematically.
So did Ambassador Huckabee, who I interviewed at the top of my show.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Now, look, people will do what they're doing with everything else. If he said that, then this must be a righty issue. So now you got to be against it if you're on the left. And here's why this game is so dangerous, okay? I get that it works for the parties. I get that it works for everybody's following and the clickbait. But there is a connecting issue, okay? Extreme Islamism is the #1 threat to your and my continued existence the way we know it in America. Not Trump, okay? Not anything else, not trans athletes, none of the other boogeymen that are put out there.
Yeah.
It has taken root in this country, and this young terrorist is like thousands and thousands of others all over this country.
Yeah.
Being pushed to find an opportunity. That's what I'm talking about tonight.
All right, looking forward to hearing you. Chris Cuomo, take it away.
Yeah.